The rain in Los Angeles never feels like real rain. It feels like a production choice, a localized atmospheric effect designed to make the neon look better against the asphalt. Maya sat in Studio B, the one with the vintage Neve console and the history that smelled like stale cigarettes and expensive ambition. She was supposed to be clearing out the storage locker in the back, the one filled with abandoned equipment and hard drives from artists who never made it past the first single. No, it was 3 o'clock in the morning. The quiet was heavy, the kind of silence that has a frequency you can almost hear. She reached for a stack of old master tapes, and her hand brushed against something that didn't belong in a rack of electronics. It was a notebook, the spine cracked, the leather cover worn to a dull charcoal gray. It had been wedged behind a disconnected power supply for 2 years. She opened it, expecting lyrics or track listings. Instead, she found a letter. It wasn't addressed to a fan or a label. It was addressed to her. The handwriting was unmistakable, tight, slanted, and frantic. It belonged to Alara, the woman who had been the ghost in Maya's machine for 6 years. The woman who had disappeared 3 months ago without a word, leaving behind only a finished album and a hole in the center of the label's roster. Maya's thumb traced the first line, and the air in the studio suddenly felt very thin. I am sitting in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, and the engine is still ticking while it cools, and I realized tonight that I have spent 2,190 days being your favorite secret. You called me at midnight to tell me the bridge on the new single was perfect, and I said thank you, and then I hung up and stared at the steering wheel until the sun came up. You don't know that I'm writing this. You'll never know. This notebook is just a place for the things I can't say, because if I say them, the music stops. And we both know the music is the only reason you look at me. You love the way I can capture a heartbreak I haven't even had yet. You love the way I can make a melody feel like a confession. But you don't love the confession itself. You love the product. Tonight, when you told me I was the best writer you'd ever signed, I wanted to ask you if you knew what color my eyes were without looking. I bet you don't. I bet you only know the color of the waveform when I hit a high note. I'm sending that demo tomorrow, the one under the name Elias. I want to see if you can hear me when I'm not wearing the mask you built for me. I want to see if you can hear the girl who stayed up until 4 in the morning just to make sure the bass line felt like a heartbeat. Your heartbeat. Not mine. Maya let the page flutter. The paper was crisp, the ink slightly faded but legible. She remembered that night. 2 years ago. The single had gone to #1 within 3 weeks, and she had celebrated by buying a car she didn't need and calling Alara to talk about the next project. She hadn't asked about the diner. She hadn't asked why Alara's voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. She had just talked about the charts. She looked around the studio at the expensive microphones and the soundproofing that kept the world out. She felt a sharp pang of nausea. She had prided herself on being the kind of executive who saw her artists, who understood their souls. But as she turned the page to the second letter, she realized she had been looking at a mirror, not a window. You signed it. You actually signed it. I sat across from you today in that glass office with the view of the hills, and I wore that stupid oversized hoodie and the glasses that aren't even mine. And I pretended to be a nervous kid named Elias, who just happened to have a voice like a haunted house. You were so kind. You were the version of you that the industry whispers about, the visionary, the protector. You told me that my voice was the most honest thing you'd heard in a decade. I almost laughed. I almost started crying right there on your designer rug. The irony is a physical weight in my chest, Maya. You are falling in love with a ghost of a ghost. You told me that what you liked most about the demo was the way I breathed between the lines. You said it sounded like someone who was afraid to be caught. You have no idea how right you are. I walked out of that office and went straight to the studio to write for your other artists, and when I saw you in the hallway an hour later, you just nodded at me like I was part of the furniture. The ghostwriter. The reliable one. I went home and threw up. I think I'm starting to hate how much I need you to notice me. It's a sickness. I'm writing songs about you for other people to sing to you, and you're listening to them in your car and thinking about your bottom line. I wonder if I died tonight. How many weeks of content you'd have left in the vault before you had to find a new heart to bleed out. Maya's breath hitched. She remembered the Elias signing. It had been the talk of the label. An anonymous talent. A voice that seemed to bypass the ears and go straight to the nervous system. She had spent months trying to build a brand around that mystery, never realizing the mystery was sitting in the room next door, drafting pop hits for teenage idols. She felt the weight of the notebook in her lap, heavier now, like it was made of lead. She turned the page again. The letters were becoming more frequent, the handwriting more jagged. She could see where the pen had pressed so hard it tore the paper. She could see the coffee stains and the smudges of charcoal where Alara had been sketching out ideas between thoughts. It was a map of a breakdown she had been too busy to see. We spent 6 hours in the booth today. Just us. No engineers, no assistants. You sat behind the console and you kept making me do the second verse over and over. You didn't say it was bad. You just said, again. You said it like you were looking for something I was hiding. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell you that I was right there, 3 feet away from you, separated only by a sheet of triple-paned glass and a lifetime of secrets. At one point, you came into the booth to adjust the microphone stand. You were so close I could smell the jasmine on your wrists and the faint scent of the rain you'd brought in with you. You touched my shoulder to move me back an inch, and I forgot how to breathe. You looked at me, really looked at me. And for a second, the mask slipped. I saw you frown, just a little, like you were trying to remember where you'd seen my eyes before. Then your phone buzzed, and the moment was gone. You went back to the console and told me to take it from the top. I hate you for being so professional. I hate you for being the only person who makes me feel like I'm not invisible, even when you're looking right through me. I stayed late tonight to finish the mix. I played the track back and I realized that I've started phrasing my vowels the way you do when you're tired. I'm becoming a version of you. If I keep this up, there won't be anything left of me at all. Just a collection of sounds that you find pleasing. Maya closed her eyes. She could see it now. The way Alara would always look away when their eyes met. The way she would always have her headphones on, even when the music wasn't playing. Maya had thought it was just the eccentricity of a genius. She had thought she was giving Alara space. She hadn't realized she was giving her a cage. She reached for her phone, tempted to call the number that had been out of service for 90 days. But she stopped herself. She owed it to the girl in the notebook to finish the story. She turned to a letter dated 14 months ago. It was the only one with a date. It was the night of the label's 5-year anniversary party. Like you looked like a queen tonight. That gold dress, the way you moved through the room like you owned the air everyone else was breathing. I watched you from the corner, near the bar, where the shadows are thickest. You came over once and asked if I was having a good time. I said yes. I lied. I was miserable. I was watching you talk to that producer from London, the one who looks at you like you're a prize he's already won. I wanted to walk up to him and tell him that he doesn't know anything about you. He doesn't know that you hate the taste of champagne, but you drink it anyway because it's expected. He doesn't know that you have a tiny scar on your left palm from a broken guitar string when you were 19. I know these things because I've spent years studying the architecture of your life. I know you better than anyone. And yet, I am the one person you will never truly know. You asked me why I wasn't dancing. I told you I was tired. You laughed and said I was always tired. You patted my arm and moved on to someone more important. I went home and wrote a song about a girl who falls in love with the moon. The moon is beautiful and bright and everyone looks at it, but it's cold and it's a million miles away and it doesn't even know it's being watched. I think that's the best thing I've ever written. You'll probably give it to a boy band and make another $1 million. I hope you do. I hope you buy a house on the coast and finally learn how to sleep through the night. I'll be the one paying for the roof, and you'll never even have to say my name. Maya felt a tear hit the back of her hand. It was cold. She hadn't realized she was crying. The sheer, unadulterated longing in the words was a physical ache. She thought about that party. She remembered feeling overwhelmed, feeling like she was performing a role she hadn't auditioned for. She remembered seeing Alara in the corner and thinking how grounded she looked, how solid. She had envied that stillness. She hadn't realized it was the stillness of someone who was drowning. She turned the page, her fingers trembling now. The letters were shorter. The space between them was growing. The writer was starting to withdraw. I wasn't going to write tonight. I'm tired of the sound of my own heart on paper. But the doctor called today. It's funny, isn't it? All this time, I've been trying to find a way to tell you who I am, and now there's a whole other person coming. Someone who will actually have my eyes. Someone who won't have to hide. I sat in the waiting room and looked at the ultrasound, and all I could think about was you. I wondered if you'd be angry. I wondered if you'd think I was being irresponsible, or if you'd just see it as a complication for the release schedule. I'm 12 weeks along. I haven't told anyone, not even the father, who was just a mistake made on a night when the silence in my apartment was too loud to bear. He's not in the picture. It's just me. And this little heartbeat that sounds like a drum machine in a room full of ghosts. I wanted to call you. I had my thumb over your name in my contacts for 20 minutes. But what would I say? Hey Maya, I'm pregnant, and I'm also the person who's been lying to you for 2 years. And also, I think I've been in love with you since the first day you walked into that basement studio and told me I had potential. No, I can't do that to you. I can't do that to myself. I'm going to finish the Elias album. I'm going to give you the best work I have left. And then, I'm going to go. I need to be a mother more than I need to be a ghost. I need to be real for someone, even if it means I have to be nothing to you. Maya gasped, the sound echoing in the empty studio. Pregnant. Alara had been pregnant during the final recording sessions. Maya walked back through the memories of those weeks, the long nights, the stress, the endless cups of coffee. She remembered Alara looking pale, remembered her taking long breaks, remembered the way she would sometimes hold her stomach when she thought no one was looking. Maya had asked if she was okay, and Alara had just smiled that small, tragic smile and said it was just the flu. Maya had believed her because it was easier than looking closer. She felt a surge of self-loathing so intense it made her lightheaded. She had been so focused on the art that she had completely missed the artist. She had been so focused on the legacy that she had ignored the life right in front of her. She turned the page to a letter from the middle of the collection, one that stood out because it was so different from the others. It was petty. It was human. I hate the way you eat your lunch. You always pick the onions out of your salad and line them up on the edge of the plastic container like little translucent soldiers. It's the most annoying thing I've ever seen. And I hate the way you use the word aesthetic when you're talking about music. Music isn't an aesthetic, Maya. It's a nervous system response. It's a scream in a dark room. You're so polished sometimes it makes me want to throw a brick through your window just to see if you'll flinch. And yet, when you get a text from your mother and your face softens for just a second, I would give every royalty check I've ever earned just to be the person who makes you look like that. You're a contradiction. You're a shark in a silk suit, and you're a little girl who's afraid of the dark. I know you keep a nightlight in your office. I saw it when I went in to leave a lyric sheet on your desk. You forgot to turn it off. It was shaped like a star. I cried all the way home because I realized that I love your weaknesses more than I love your strengths. Your strengths don't need me, but your weaknesses, they're where the music comes from. I wish you'd let me see them more often. I wish you'd let me be the person who turns the light off for you. Maya let out a shaky laugh. The onions, the nightlight, details she had forgotten she even possessed. Alara had been paying attention to the things Maya hadn't even noticed about herself. The gap between the woman she thought she was and the woman Alara saw was vast, and in that gap, a whole world of missed opportunities lived. She turned to another letter, one that was written in a different pen. The ink a deep, bruised purple. You asked me today if I was happy. We were sitting on the floor of the studio, eating cold pizza, and the album was finally done. You looked at me, and you didn't look like a boss. You looked like a friend. You asked, Alara, are you actually okay? And for a second, The truth was right there on the tip of my tongue. I could have told you everything. I could have told you about Elias, about the baby, about the letters. I could have told you that I don't want to be a ghostwriter anymore. I want to be yours. But then you started talking about the marketing plan, about the tour, about how much this album was going to change both of our lives. And I realized that the truth would only break the thing you've worked so hard to build. You don't want a partner, Maya. You want a success story. So I told you I was fine. I told you I was just tired. You nodded and said you were too. We sat there in the dark for a long time, not saying anything. It was the closest we've ever been. And it was the moment I knew I had to leave. Because being that close to you and still being 1,000 miles away is a kind of torture. I'm not strong enough to survive anymore. I'm leaving on Friday. The masters are on the server. The paperwork is signed. You have everything you need from me. I hope it's enough. Maya stood up and started pacing the small room. The floorboards creaked under her feet. She remembered that Friday. She had come into the studio with a box of donuts to celebrate, and the room had been empty. No note, and no explanation, just a clean desk and a hard drive. She had been furious. She had felt betrayed. She had spent weeks calling Alara's phone, sending emails that bounced back, checking with mutual friends who knew nothing. She had thought Alara had been headhunted by a bigger label. She had thought it was about money. She had never once considered that it was about love. She sat back down, her heart hammering against her ribs. There were only a few letters left. She turned the page to one that was written on a scrap of paper, a receipt from a grocery store in a town 2 hours north of the city. I'm living in a small house near the coast now. There are roses in the garden, and they're blooming even though it's late in the season. I spend a lot of time just watching the ocean. It's louder than the studio, but it's a better kind of noise. I think about you every time I hear a song on the radio that I wrote. It feels like hearing a message from a past life. I wonder if you're still working until 3 in the morning. I wonder if you ever found the nightlight I left in your drawer. I miss the way the air smells in the studio right before a breakthrough, that ozone smell like a storm is coming. But I don't miss the lying. My daughter was born 3 weeks ago. She has your chin. Isn't that strange? She has nothing to do with you, and yet there you are, written into her face. I named her Maya. I know. It's pathetic. But I wanted to be able to say your name every day without it feeling like a secret. She's sleeping in the other room right now, and for the first time in my life, I don't feel like I need to write anything down. I'm finally quiet. I hope you're happy, Maya. I hope you found what you were looking for. I hope you know that even if you never read these, they were the truest things I ever said. Maya stopped. She couldn't see the words anymore. Her vision was completely blurred. And the daughter was named Maya. The girl she had been looking for, the woman who had been her creative heartbeat, was out there somewhere, raising a child with her name. She felt a profound sense of loss, a grief that was so heavy it felt like it was crushing her lungs. She had been so wrong about everything. She had thought she was the one in control, the one making the moves, but she had been the one who was blind. She had been the one who was missing. She turned to the very last letter. It was written on a plain piece of white paper, tucked into the very back of the notebook. It wasn't like the others. It was short, the handwriting steady. I'm going to the store to get some milk and some bread. The weather is supposed to turn cold tonight, so I'll make that soup you liked. The one with the roasted red peppers. I should probably fix the leak in the kitchen sink, too. It's been dripping for 3 days, and it's starting to sound like a metronome. I'll see you when I get back. Or I won't. But the roses are still blooming, and that has to mean something. I'm not writing to you anymore, Maya. I'm just writing. And that's enough. The ordinariness of it was what finally broke her. The transition from the grand, sweeping declarations of love to the simple, daily tasks of a life lived apart. It was the sound of a door closing, not with a bang, but with a soft, final click. Maya sat in the silence of the studio for a long time. The rain had stopped. and the neon outside was reflecting in the puddles on the street, creating a fractured, beautiful world that she didn't recognize. She looked at the notebook. She looked at the console. She looked at the gold records on the wall. None of it mattered. Not the hits, not the money, not the reputation. The only thing that mattered was the woman who had written those letters and the child who carried her name. Maya stood up. She didn't put the notebook back. She tucked it under her arm. She didn't turn off the lights. She didn't lock the storage locker. She just walked out of the studio and into the cool, damp night. She didn't have a plan, but she had a name and a town and a memory of roses blooming out of season. She got into her car and started the engine. For the first time in years, she didn't turn on the radio. She didn't want to hear a song. She wanted to hear a voice. She drove north, away from the lights, away from the noise, toward the ocean. She drove until the sun started to peek over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold. She found the town. It was small, a cluster of houses clinging to the cliffs above the Pacific. She drove slowly, looking for roses. She found them in front of a small cottage with blue shutters. The garden was overgrown, but the flowers were there, vibrant and defiant against the morning mist. She parked the car and sat there for a long time, her hands gripping the steering wheel. She was terrified. She was more afraid than she had ever been in a boardroom or at a launch party. She was afraid of the truth. She was afraid of what she would find when she opened the door. But she was more afraid of what would happen if she didn't. She got out of the car. The air smelled of salt and damp earth. She walked up the path, her heart a frantic drum in her chest. She reached the door and hesitated. She could hear a sound from inside. A soft, rhythmic hum, but a woman's voice singing a lullaby. It was a melody Maya didn't recognize, a song that had never been recorded, never been mixed, never been sold. It was pure. It was real. She knocked. The singing stopped. There was the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate. The door opened. Ilara stood there, holding a small bundle wrapped in a yellow blanket. She looked older, tired, but her eyes were the same. The eyes that had seen everything Maya had tried to hide. Ilara didn't say anything. She didn't look surprised. She just looked at Maya, and for a long moment, the only sound was the distant roar of the ocean. Maya looked at the baby, at the tiny chin, at the sleeping face. She looked back at Ilara. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say she had read the letters. She didn't say she loved her. She just reached out and touched the edge of the yellow blanket. Ilara stepped back, not to turn away, but to let her in. Maya crossed the threshold, on leaving the ghostwriter and the executive outside. She walked into the small, warm house, into the smell of roasted peppers and wood smoke. She walked into the life she had almost missed. Ilara closed the door. The click was quiet, but it was the loudest thing Maya had ever heard. They stood in the small kitchen, the light from the window catching the dust motes in the air. Ilara set the baby down in a bassinet and turned to face her. Her face was a map of everything they hadn't said, the history written in the lines around her mouth and the set of her shoulders. Maya felt the weight of the notebook in her hand, a physical manifestation of the years they had lost to the music. She set it on the table. It looked small there, among the mundane objects of a real life. A half-empty coffee mug, a set of keys, a bowl of fruit. Ilara looked at the notebook, then back at Maya. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "You found them," she said. Her voice was low, the same voice that had haunted Maya's dreams for months. Maya nodded. "I found everything," she said. She felt her throat tighten, the words struggling to find a way out. "I'm so sorry I didn't see you." Ilara walked over to her, stopping just a few inches away. The jasmine was gone, replaced by the scent of soap and milk and something uniquely hers. She reached up and touched Maya's cheek, her fingers warm and steady. "You're seeing me now?" she whispered. Maya leaned into the touch, unclosing her eyes. The silence in the room wasn't heavy anymore. It was full. It was the sound of a song finally reaching its resolution. They stayed like that for a long time. Two women who had been circling each other in the dark, finally standing in the light. Outside, the sun rose higher, burning off the mist and illuminating the roses in the garden. The world was waking up, but in that small kitchen, time had stopped. There would be questions later. There would be explanations and tears and the complicated work of building something new from the wreckage of the old. There would be the industry to deal with, the contracts to untangle, the masks to discard. But for now, there was just this: the warmth of a hand, the breath of a child, and the quiet truth that some things are worth more than 1,000,000,000 streams. Maya opened her eyes and looked at Alara, really looked at her, seeing the color of her eyes, the strength in her hands, and the love that had survived the silence. She realized then that the letters hadn't been an end. They had been a beginning, a map that had led her back to the only thing that had ever been real. She took a breath, the air deep and clean. "Hello, Ilara," she said. Ilara smiled, and this time there was no tragedy in it. "Hello, Maya," she replied. They sat at the small table and talked. Not about the charts, not about the business, but about the roses and the rain and the way the light changed on the ocean in the afternoon. They talked until the baby woke up and needed to be held, and then they talked while they took turns rocking her. The notebook sat on the table between them, its pages full of the past, but its cover closed on the future. Maya realized that she didn't need to write anything down to remember this moment. She didn't need a recording or a mix or a master tape. She just needed to be here, in the quiet, in the real. She looked at the woman who had been her ghost and saw a partner. She looked at the child who had her name and saw a legacy. And as she watched Alara laugh at something small and ordinary, Maya knew that the most beautiful music she would ever hear was the sound of a life being lived out loud. The slow burn had finally reached the heart, and instead of consuming them, it was keeping them warm. They spent the rest of the day in that small house, the world outside forgotten. Like they walked down to the beach, the baby tucked into a carrier against Alara's chest. The wind was cold, but they didn't mind. They walked along the shoreline, the waves washing over their feet, leaving behind shells and smooth stones. Maya felt a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. She felt grounded, connected to the earth and the sea and the woman beside her. She realized that she had spent her whole life trying to capture moments, to bottle them up and sell them, but the best moments were the ones you just let happen. They watched the sunset from the porch, the sky turning a deep, fiery red. It was a production choice the world had made just for them. Alara leaned her head on Maya's shoulder, and Maya rested her cheek against Alara's hair. They didn't need to say anything. The letters had said it all, and now the silence was enough. It was a silence that was shared, a silence that was understood. It was the sound of two people finally being in the same room at the same time. As the stars began to appear, one by one, Maya thought about the nightlight in her office. She thought about the star-shaped glow that had kept the dark away. She realized she didn't need it anymore. She had found a different kind of light, one that didn't need to be plugged in. She had found a light that came from the inside out. They went back inside and made dinner, the ordinary tasks feeling like a sacred ritual. They washed the dishes together, their hands brushing in the soapy water. They put the baby to bed and then sat on the sofa, the only light coming from the embers in the fireplace. Maya felt a deep, profound gratitude. She was grateful for the box, for the notebook, for the rain that had sent her into the storage locker. She was grateful for the girl who had been brave enough to write the things she couldn't say. She looked at Alara and saw the woman she wanted to grow old with. She saw the woman she wanted to wake up to every morning. She saw the woman who had saved her without even trying. "I'm not going back," Maya said, the words surprising even herself. Alara looked at her, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "You don't have to," she said. "We'll find a way," Maya said, her voice firm. "We'll make our own music." Alara smiled and took Maya's hand. "We already are," she said. And in the quiet of the coastal night, with the roses blooming outside and the ocean roaring in the distance, Maya knew she was right. They were making something better than a hit. They were making a life. And that was the most honest thing of all. The next morning, Maya woke up to the sound of birds and the smell of coffee. She lay in bed for a moment, listening to the house breathe. She heard the soft murmur of Alara talking to the baby in the next room. She heard the clink of a spoon against a cup, or she felt a surge of joy so intense it brought tears to her eyes. She got out of bed and walked into the kitchen. Alara was standing by the stove, the baby on her hip. She turned and smiled when she saw Maya. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," Maya replied. She walked over and put her arms around Alara, holding her and the baby close. She felt the heartbeat of the woman she loved and the heartbeat of the child she would help raise. She felt the weight of the past falling away, leaving only the present. They spent the morning in the garden, pulling weeds and talking about what they wanted to plant next. They talked about the future, not as a series of goals, but as a series of days. They talked about the music they would make, not for the charts, but for themselves. They talked about the truth and how much easier it was to carry than a lie. Maya looked at the roses, their petals soft and vibrant. She realized that they were like the letters, beautiful, fragile, and a testament to the fact that even in the coldest seasons, something can still grow. She reached out and touched a red petal, feeling its velvet texture. She felt a sense of wonder at the world, at the way things work out, at the way a secret can become a bridge. She looked at Alara and saw her home. She saw the place where she belonged. She saw the woman who had written her a map to her own heart. And as they stood there in the garden, under the bright morning sun, Maya knew that she would never be a ghost again. She was real. She was seen. She was loved. And that was all the music she would ever need. They stayed in that town for a week, then a month, then a year. Maya sold her house in the city and moved her things into the cottage. She sold her share of the label and started a small production company from the spare bedroom. They worked together, but differently this time. There were no masks, no secrets, no ghosts. There was only the music and the love and the daughter who grew up with two mothers and a garden full of roses. The notebook stayed on the shelf, a reminder of the things they had overcome. Sometimes, on a rainy night, Maya would take it down and read a page or two. Not because she needed to remember the pain, but because she wanted to remember the journey. She wanted to remember the girl who had been brave enough to write her heart out. And every time she finished reading, she would look at Alara and feel a fresh wave of love. She would feel the gap between them had finally been closed. She would feel the music in the silence. And she would know, with a certainty that she had never felt in the city, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. They lived a quiet life, a life of small moments and big love. They lived a life that was honest and real and full of music. And in the end, that was the greatest success story of all. And the world still heard their songs, but they didn't know the names behind them. And that was just fine. Because the people who mattered knew the truth. The people who mattered were right there, in the same room, listening to the heartbeat of a life well lived. And as the years went by, the roses kept blooming and the ocean kept roaring, and the love kept growing, stronger and deeper with every passing day. It was a slow burn that would never go out. It was a confession that would never end. It was the truest thing they ever said. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Maya often thought back to that night in the studio, the smell of ozone and the weight of the notebook. She realized that she hadn't just found a collection of letters. She had found herself. She had found a way to be human in a world that often demanded she be something else. She had found a way to love without fear. She looked at Alara, who was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. Now she looked at their daughter, who was playing in the grass. She felt a sense of completion, a sense of rightness. She walked out to the porch and sat down beside Alara, taking her hand. "What are you thinking about?" Alara asked, leaning her head on Maya's shoulder. "I'm thinking about the roses," Maya said, smiling. "I'm thinking about how they always seem to bloom right when we need them to." Alara laughed, a sound like a perfect melody. "They do, don't they?" she said. And as the sun disappeared below the horizon, leaving behind a sky full of stars, they sat together in the quiet, grateful for the things they had said, and even more grateful for the things they didn't have to say anymore. They were two women, one life, and a love that was written in the stars and on the pages of a worn leather notebook. A love that was finally, beautifully, undeniably real. The story of Elias and the Ghostwriter was over, but the story of Maya and Alara was just beginning. And it was a story that would never be unsent. It was a story that would be told every day, in every look, in every touch, in every breath. It was a story that was finally perfectly home. Maya looked at the stars and thought about the nightlight. She realized that the whole world was full of light if you knew where to look. She realized that she didn't have to be afraid of the dark anymore. She had Ilara. She had the music. She had the truth. And that was all she ever needed. She squeezed Ilara's hand, and Ilara squeezed back. They were together. They were whole. They were home. And that was the end of the letters, but the beginning of everything else. The music drifted out from the house, a soft acoustic melody that Ilara had been working on. It was a song about a garden and a girl and a love that wouldn't give up. It was a song about them. And as the notes floated away on the ocean breeze, Maya knew that they would never be lost again. They had found each other. They had found the music. They had found the way. And that was the most beautiful thing of all. They sat there until the stars were bright and the air was cold. Then they went inside and closed the door. The house was warm and full of life. It was a place of safety and love. It was their place. And as they turned out the lights and went to bed, the only sound was the rhythmic breathing of their daughter and the distant, constant roar of the sea. It was a sound that meant they were safe. It was a sound that meant they were loved. It was a sound that meant they were real. And in the morning, they would wake up and do it all again. They would live their life, one ordinary, beautiful day at a time. They would love each other, and they would make music, and they would watch the roses bloom. And they would never, ever be ghosts again. They were finally, truly, undeniably alive. And that was the best confession of all.